More gas, no brakes. So basically another poke night in English. This week, besides English, we'll be studying heads up sit and goes, and we will be playing on polka stars, mostly because I had a pre-recorded session for this week, but the video file didn't work as it is supposed to, so therefore we are playing live this time. I was asked to play the very smallest stakes because it was pointed out that if someone were to transfer to the heads up sit and goes, they would most likely be playing the smallest stakes. So therefore, I'm giving kind of an introduction whether the games play anywhere similar to the a bit bigger ones we have been playing in the past. We turn a gut shot, but actually this turn gut doesn't look like a good card to barrel on. Can I please get a confirmation whether I can be both seen and the screen can be seen and I can be heard, so I know to stop within 2 minutes, so if I don't get any kind of message, so I don't speak to myself for too long. Pretty small tree, but in table number 1. So definitely not going to fold hand this strong. Against the continuation bet, I'm just going to fold. Even the bluffs have plenty of equity. Thank you, Angel Zero. No, Angle Zero. We face mean check raise. This is actually a funny looking spot. On table number 2, I'm just going to flat call because this guy has been only playing one out of his 4 buttons. This is funny looking spot. I think I'm just going to 3-bet and get it in, because I think I have some folding equity versus a mean check raise. On the turn card, I think he would have forbidden the very best holdings on the flop most of the times, because this is a smaller stake, so I'm just gonna bet call, and betting because I still think that I'm going to have some folding equity. Now on this river we have all the blockers to the missed hands, both on straight and flush, and I can't imagine the queen x hands folding, for example. This I would have c-betted it if I had time. So he mean check raise calls with a middle pair and calls also on the turn, so let's take mental note about that. We are definitely not going to expect to have any folding equity in any kind of spots later. Um, 20 big blinds deep, I think it's okay to fold hands like this, even though he seems to be pretty bad He's playing almost all the hands, so it's pretty hard to show a profit, I think. This hand is actually pretty close. I think I'm just going to shove. Neo asks whether I use all my stats. Yeah, I definitely use all of them. I had even more of them in my heart, but I created some pop-ups for the ones that I took out of my away out of my heart. So yeah, I definitely use all of them, and I would use more stats or put more stats into my heart if it didn't take as much space as it does. So he check raised the check called the flush draw and didn't bet the turn or the river when he actually made the flush. So seems to be pretty passive with his very strong stance, which is pretty weird compared to the fact that he min check raised with the middle pair. Yeah, I think all of these stats are pretty helpful and give me a possibility not to I think this is just a fold. Give me a possibility not to use too much pop-ups. I just took a pretty exploitative line with pocket jacks, 13 big blinds deep, and this is a flop. I'm just going to, even though he 3-bets a bunch, I think my equity against his range is just too poor. And this might look pretty weak, but I'm just going to check fold this against the bet. In this table number 2, I'm not going to 3-bet too much, pretty much because he's only opening 20-ish% of his hands. And actually against a pretty wide 3-bet, I could fold the very worst hands I have. Now when he opens, I finally have a hand to call him with. This I'm just going to 3-bet with, and definitely want to have a pure value 3-bet range until I see that he also folds to 3-bets a lot. I'm just getting it in. I'm flipping. This is a pretty close pot, but he also has a wide limp folding range with shallow stacks, so I'm not going to 3-bet shove as much as I would usually. Neo asks how big of a ROI I have on stars in my micros. I don't play micro stakes. I don't know if I have ever played this small of a sit and goes on PokerStars, but on the stakes I play on stars, which are from $15 to $60 games nowadays. From the regular speed games, I have managed to get a somewhere around a 10% ROI, and from turbos somewhere around 6 or 7%. which is pretty good, I think. Like, it's one of the top ROIs I have seen on those takes. This is close. Yeah, I think I have also been running pretty well. And I game select pretty tightly nowadays. I don't battle with the regulars too much. If I play against the best regulars, I play them because the lobbies are full or I don't have any tables running, or just because they hit me for some reason. Here I don't think we have too much showdown equity. I think my turn sizing could have been a bit bigger. But I think I can get enough. Oh, I can get enough folds if I bet. Seems like I don't have enough time for both talking and acting in the turbos, but luckily for us, he happened to have a 2-pair. He limp min raises. This was actually both of these guys were sitting and waiting for an opponent. So on higher stakes, I would assume that that to be a sign of a bit better player. This is funny. He limp min raised and then just checked twice. I'm going to make a small value bet just in case he wants to call me with a small pocket pair or ace high or something. I opted not to see bet here just because I don't see a ton of value and I don't see bet on this flop text too much. And we have a very good hand to call the turn bet with. When he plays like this, his holding is usually, or his range is usually going to be pretty weak. So I'm not going to bet too big. Just hoping to get a call from Queen X or any shot of 1-pair hand. He revert 2-pair. So pretty standard. His call on river is both standard and good in my opinion. He seems to be a bit tighter. Only 8 hands, but if you don't play every single of your buttons and only half of your big blinds, I think you are going to be on a tighter side. Yeah, he limps when we haven't 3-bet him not once, so usually a sign of a funnier player, which is I don't know if I should even be bothered to label these guys with a blue color, because I don't think I will be playing too much against them in the future. This was this guy's first min raise or first raise on the bottom, but I'm not folding king 5 and I'm calling the min bets all the way to the river. I think this is just, I think, good enough hand to not to bluff in this spot. I think he rarely has a very good hand, so I could bluff in this spot, but I don't think I have to with a king high. He had 9s, which is stronger than I would have assumed. He has been fairly tight, even though the c-bet is pretty big compared to a flop, and even though I have a ace of hearts, I think folding is fine, because I think the villains on these level are, or on these stakes, are going to be pretty weak, and they will not be 3-bet bluffing enough for me to take 2 light call downs. Of course I can be proven wrong, but until I have, I'm gonna assume they will not. I could have 3-betted the king jack, but he has only been opening or playing 63% out of the hands, so I didn't. I'm just going to check this down. I'm calling a river bet until unless he pots it. He didn't bet the 7 on the turn of the river, so that's a noteworthy. Neo asked when I get shorter, like under 20 big blinds, how much would you defend, or how much would I defend with calls, and what range? That's a good question, and it really depends on how much my opponent open raises and with which sizing. So that's actually a question that can't be answered shortly or anyway. Like with any satisfying answer, I think. This actually, I'm just going to try whether he folds to 3-bets. And he doesn't, but we flop top pair. I'm just going to see bet. Yeah, but I'm not gonna tighten up too much. I'm going to, I'm going to have a wide 3-betting range, 20 big blinds deep, mostly shoving range. Some smaller 3-bets also. Yeah, I'm gonna 3-bet bunch, and then hands that I don't want to 3-bet with, but I think can be played post flop profitably. I'm just gonna. I think this is going to be a pretty good hand to shove. He has been 3-betting very widely, and small pocket pairs play very well as a 4-bet hands. And again, I'm just going to. Well, I could have shoved 27 bigs. I think deuces are. It's close, but yeah, I think I definitely get enough folds versus a 4-bet again. And now it's my turn to win a flip, so easy game, easy life. He min 3-bet or 3-betted it. I don't know how those words work, but yeah, and we obviously call. And on a flop, I just call a min bet. On the turn, he increases his sizing, and I'm just going to raise when we turn a 2 pair and we want to get money in. And I'm just going to act pretty quickly because I don't have a time bank. Now he had a flopped set, so pretty coolerish in my opinion. Could write a note that he made a min 3-bet with 8s and then min bet with a set. And yeah, now I'm just pretty much get it in with 1 big blind every single hand. The lobbies are there's no players, so we might need to wait for a minute or so. And just now another bomb hunter joined, so I'm just going to seize him. Sebastian from Russia. Yeah, if you have any questions, if there are more of a quiet moments in this during this coaching session, I try to answer them all, but Neo asks about adjusting to the against different type of players. Yeah, those are actually good things to discuss about. And I was about to mention before winning the deuces against ace-4 that when the opponent had a pretty wide 3-betting range, 40% or something, I would have had a pretty wide limping range against him. This I think I'm just going to check fold. Even though he's gonna have a lot of ace-x hands, maybe. Well, I don't know if he limps with them. So yeah, against a villain that 3-bets a lot, I think it's good idea in a sit and go where there's no rake to, in addition to your opening range, to take a limping range with mostly hands that you can limp call with. Okay, yeah. So, for example, like depending on his 3-bet size, but hands like 10-8 or hands like that, maybe queen 6. That kind of hands can be limp called with if he doesn't raise with a huge sizing versus your limps. Villains that open a lot of hands, you usually just want to 3-bet against, try 3-betting against them and try to get a read whether they call every single 3-bet or fold every single 3-bet or even most of them, and from there you can just pretty easily get to build ranges for 3-betting and calling him in raise or calling his open raise. So if he opens a lot but calls every single 3-bet, you just want to have a pretty wide 3-bet value range and pretty much never want to be bluffing. This guy has been fairly passive, so I just folded the top high card against a mean bet. He's also been dunk betting some and hasn't folded to a C bet, so I just try to raise his dunk bet with a no equity hand. Now we turn a open ender and he mean bets again. I think I'm just going to call. I don't expect to get too much folds against from like a 5 or check. On this river it's pretty close, but I think king works as a pretty scary card against, let's say, a 5. So I try to get him to fold. Okay, he had aces. So he mean dunk betted aces. Let's try to remember that. I raised the limp and then we flop a bottom pair and just kind of. This is pretty close actually. He called a 4-bet, called a flop bet, and then bets very small on the turn. This doesn't make too much sense, but I think I'm just going to call and call most rivers, or bet myself if he checks. And yeah, he might easily just have like ace jack with a 1 diamond or no diamonds. If he has a value hand, I think he's going to have a flush. And jack 10 with 1 diamond. Okay. When it doesn't make sense, it usually doesn't make sense. We turn pair, and he has been bit tricky with his stronger holdings as well. So I'm not making too many multi-street bluffs. Then he shows a 10 high when he calls flop c-bet, so I will be c-bet bluffing on the turn. So this is basically what the games look like on these the very smallest stakes. Again, he has been pretty passive, so I think I might just want to try to show down my king high. River pass an 8, and that's actually not a very good card to bluff with or bluff on, so I just check it down or check fold the river. On this river, he hasn't been value betting with the second pairs too much, so he either checked the ace on the turn or he's bluffing, I think. So I'm just gonna call. Okay, he river 2 pair. That's pretty much the same. Against opponents that c-bet every flop, just don't fold a pair and try check raising. Try to find out how they react to check raises. If they fold a lot, what they often do if they c-bet too much, you can just start to check raise as a bluff a lot, and yeah, mean bet again. I think I'm calling. He doesn't have to bluff too often, and I would have thought that when he mean bets, he's not gonna have the strongest value hands, but he had a flush, so against mean bets I'm gonna be folding more. We flop 2 pair and he pot-sized bets, so basically I just don't want him to. We block too many of his value hands that I don't want him to fold his bluffs, so I'm just going to check call it down, and he shoves the turn with king high. So running good. Gonna register another game and putting all the money in on this table. Neo asks, if there are board textures that are better for check raising than the other ones are. Yeah, I think the um, if you have an opponent that folds to check raises a lot, you want to be check raising very dry boards as a bluff, because it's harder to have a good enough hand to call with. For example, if you check raise this flop, Jack 10 7 with two hearts, it's pretty easy to have a gut shot or flush draw or any pair to continue on. But on if you check raise on King 7 for rainbow, it's pretty tough to have. You need two cards to have a straight draw. You can't have a flush draw. So on these dry, not very connected boards, it's I think it's better to check raise those as a bluff if your opponent folds to check raises a lot. We face 3 dunk bets. It's second hand of the match. We have second pair. I don't like it too much, but with no reach, I'm just not gonna fold. And that's pretty much why. Usually with a good hand, it's a good idea for the big blind to check and induce a bet. So dunk bets usually are somewhat capped. Not always, but somewhat. Yeah, then the guys that bet multiple streets, I would just want to find out what kind of hands they bet multiple streets with. If they do it with zero equity also, then I'm just not going to fold too much. Like, never going to fold the top pair and so on. And just going to give them a possibility to barrel. Not going to like check raise my best hands on flop and so on. Give them rope to hang themselves. So yeah, that's a pretty simple adjustment to that. And against a player that never folds when you bluff, just don't bluff as much. Just have a wider value bet range. And yeah, those are some simple ways to adjust against a pretty common types of opponents, actually. Good questions from Neo. Biake, I don't know if that's even close to how you hope your name to be pronounced, but Biake asks how many heads up sit and goes I play at once. I try to play more than 4 tables, because the stack sizes are, or this I actually could have just folded. He has been very passive and hasn't been bluffing lately at all, so I think I should be just folding a ton of hands in these spots. I try to play more than four tables, usually 4 to 6 tables, but I pretty much end up 4 tabling a lot because I play on multiple sides and yeah. Here I turn a double gutter and he has been folding on a turbot a bit more than, well, half a time with a small sample, so I think it's a good bluffing spot. So yeah, usually just 4 table. The stack sizes are, since these games begin with 75 big blinds, the effective stack sizes will never be bigger than 75 big blinds, and very often they are between 30 and or 20 and 50 big blinds. So the decisions are going to be pretty simple, and with some practice you can play multiple tables pretty easily. Again, he's been folding a turn to a turn, c-bet a bunch, and this jack might look like a scary card for like 5x hands, and we also have a gut shot, so I think it's again a pretty good bluffing spot. And yeah, if you are comfortable with 2 tables, then you shouldn't be playing more than 2 tables, just because someone else plays more tables. Just do what you are comfortable with, and if you play, for example, $7 games as your main game, and you are used to 2 tabling them, you can just take a session with 3 or $1 games and try to play 3 tables, and with a on a smaller stake you can pretty easily practice against a softer villains, and with a smaller variance money wise. So for example, when I he 3-barrel with no equity on a, that's actually a pretty good flop board texture for him to be bluffing on. So yeah, when I try to adjust my table count with the buy-ins. If I get a bunch of $20 games running, I can play more tables than I would in a $60 or $100 games. And also with cash games I can multi-table the NL50s, but I usually play up to 2 tables on NL100 or 200 or so on. Here he might have a turned straight or flush pretty easily, but as we saw in the last match, they show down a lot worse hands than those. So I think I'm just going to call with a 1.2 SPR. He has a pair and a gut shot and a flush draw. So we were right about that. Angle Zero has a point about reviewing times. Or yeah, Angle Zero has a pretty good point. And yeah, obviously you get better with stuff like that with practice. So, and usually it comes kind of naturally when you start to play more tables. You are usually concentrating better than you usually do. In a very second hand, I'm just going to get it in with tens. And here we turn nuts. I'm just going to bet this small, pretty small. Turn pretty small and try to get a small SPR on the river. And this is pretty much a cooler. I'm going to answer the questions before opening new matches. Neo asks about bluffing. What board textures and turns and river are good to bluff? Well, there's no short answer on that one as well, but I would say that the cards that are better for your range and not too good for your opponent's range are the good cards to bluff. And also that goes in hand with this kind of scariness of the card. If your opponent's range is full of middle or bottom pairs on the flop, and then the turn is an overcard that fills a flush draw that he is unlikely to have because he just check called to flop, then that's usually a pretty good card to bluff on. And are wet boards better or dry ones better for bluffing? It usually depends on how your opponent plays his draws. But yeah, for example, if your opponent always check raises with a flush draw, no matter what, if he has a flush draw, he's going to check raise a flop, then you usually want to bluff on the flush turn cards a lot, because he's just never going to have a flush, and you can have a bunch of those. These are just like a simple examples, but on that wide of a area to discuss, that's pretty much all I can offer. Do you bluff / continue barreling when possible? Yeah, that's pretty much what I answered. Bjarke states that yeah, you can just try to work the not making the snap decisions by just trying to like read the situation or state the situation even out loud. Even the simple decisions you can just like commentate to yourself or whatever, like on every single spot, that okay, this is a flop spot, I do not want to see bet because of this, and then you check. And so that kind of forces you to take some time with every single decision. It looks like we have showed a small profit so far, and actually this is pretty rare to see anyone two table these stakes, but we get kind of a two tabling match. So yeah, it seems to be possible to get find some kind of a regular from these stakes, it looks like. But let's see why this guy is playing $1.5 games and not the bigger ones. Excuse me. And thanks for the questions. It's funny that I have or host a poker night when you guys are attending actively. This is pretty funny line. He opted not to c-bet the turn and then bets the river, and that's usually not a line to bluff. This turn card could be a good bluffing card for him, so when he opts to not to bet that card, he usually has some kind of hand, and I would guess that he had a 10 most often. Donk bets. Okay, I'm just going to fold the very worst hand. He has pretty small check raise sizing. I'm just going to call, but it should be noticed that he uses this sizing on a pretty wet board, and if he has another sizing on similar type of board, it's something to be noticed in the future. If he would have bet the ace turn, I would have called because I had a club, and as I said, it is a pretty good card for him to bluff on. He check raises the flop and then check calls the turn. So I think it's pretty obvious that he has either sets or some kind of 9x hand or 2 pair or something like that. And the board runs down like it's not too scary for 2 pair hands or so on. So I'm actually going to bet pretty big. And I think 5-10 is a sizing that gets a call pretty often. It's pretty hard for me to be bluffing in this spot, but we are playing $1 game, and I think he has seen a bunch of weird stuff happening. So I think taking a bit bigger sizing than just a half pot is a pretty good idea, with no overcards to a flop top card and a top pair. This is a spot where I could check raise a lot because as a bluff, because well, it's pretty hard for him to have anything. As mentioned before, this needs to be bet on the river. He needs 2 cards to have a straight draw, and if he doesn't open every single hand, as he seems not to do, he's gonna have very rarely anything to call me with. So I'm just going to check call. The river is turn is actually pretty close. This is actually a spot where I could check raise in, but I think I'm still not going to. He c-bet folded the turn, which means that he is able to c-bet turn wider than some people are. In here he uses a slightly bigger sizing, and again I'm going to check raise on the turn, and I would imagine that he's gonna be a bit angry about it. Yeah, he goes in with the pocket nines, which just looks like some kind of a blow up. This I'm just going to check. So yeah, maybe that's one of the reasons he plays the smallest games available. His line doesn't make too much sense. So he might have a weak 10, but that's pretty rare, or pocket 7s, so I'm just going to call. And yeah, then he can value bet the worse hands, but I was thinking about the hands that beat me. So yeah. So as you have probably seen by now that these games are pretty soft, and if you decide to start studying heads up, maybe to take it to your main game or to I don't know, to go to heads up games, you can just pretty cheaply begin with these games, and just by looking at my videos get a pretty good basic strategy, and I would imagine it's hard to lose a lot of money, and you most likely will end up winning some pretty quickly, even if you are just a beginner. And yeah, and I think playing heads up is going to be pretty good for you, whether you are an sit and go player or MTT player or even a 6max player. You get to face the situations with pretty wide ranges, and you need to think about combinations or ranges in a different way than you are used to. So I think that's definitely going to be good for you long term and make you a better poker player. This guy seems to be fine. He's playing a bit too tight, and he blew up with the 9s. This guy don't bet it the flop, half bet, and keeps betting on the turn. It's close, I could raise, but I think calling is fine as well. And now against the check, I think he's gonna have a 8 a lot, or maybe a misdraw. His range is going to be pretty weak, so this is a spot I'm going to use a smaller sizing. He mean check raises the river. Wow. This is funny. He shouldn't be bluffing like this, but we get a ridiculously good odds, and he only needs to be bluffing like once out of never, so I'm just going to call. Okay, he don't bet it the bottom pair, and mean check raised when he kept betting on the turn, and mean check raised on the river when hitting 2 pair. So just going to kind of take a mental note about the flop donk bet and the fact that he can be tricky on the river with good hands. Neo asks about if I had a opponent who seems to be seldom fold to c-bet. Do you then adjust by not c-betting? What I do if my opponent doesn't fold c-bets too much, then I just c-bet wider for value. And there are some guys that don't ever fold to c-bet on the flop or the turn, and then might fold on the river. Usually they fold on the river if they never fold on the flop or turn. Then I just value bet wider on both flop and turn, and then 3-bet barrel as a bluff some and try to take the structures that or textures that are good for barreling, tree barreling. So basically, if I don't have any backdoor outs or anything, pretty much zero equity against his range, I'm just giving up a bit more than I would usually do. Yeah. This guy has both limping and open race ranges, and I try to find out whether he limp folds or limp calls more often when he limps. Then I hit the bottom pair and don't see a ton of value in betting, and on the turn I opt to bet because I want to get value from one spade hands. Yes, there's 30 minutes to go, so I will just keep taking the games, and you can still keep asking me good questions as you have so far. Yeah, Björk has a good point. I actually do that quite a lot myself. If I get kind of bored with one game, I can find a motivation to play by playing another. So I myself play heads up and six max no limits myself as well, and also some heads up PLO lately. I raced against the donk bet. This is a guy who donk betted the bottom pair, so he might continue with all of his donk betting hands. And with a small SPR, I'm just going to bet small and try to get it in. He might overplay some. He obviously might have a better hand than we do, but I'm not going to fold hand this strong. And as we can see, it's pretty likely that these guys overplay the one pair hands. Here in limp pot you could bet yourself, but I don't mind getting a free turn card, and against a 1.5 x pot bet on this flop, I'm just going to fold my gut shot. Pretty small tree, but with this big of a stack sizes, so I'm just going to call. This guy has been donk betting all of his one pair hands, so when he checks and we have all the blockers to mate hands, it's pretty likely that he's going to be check folding. But I make a small c-bet, smaller than half pot, just to give him a possibility to do something like this. And well, he can have a legit hand, it's possible, but it's more likely that he has nothing. So I'm just going to call and give him a possibility to do something stupid again. If he has a made hand, then it's pretty much cool. And again, we have 1.8 SPR, so we could be shoving here, but it's pretty likely that he has nothing. So I'm just going to bet very small to give him a kind of a stupid feeling to fold anything. So I'm just trying to take his money. And yeah, he ends up calling the turn with an open ender and a flush draw. Pretty good call, I think, but the flop, huge check raise on the flop was pretty ridiculous. And then the river shove, when I pretty clearly have something. It wasn't the best in my opinion. Looks like we are actually making some money. Yeah. This is a turn card I don't expect to get too many or too much folds on, so I just give up. And actually against a good player, the flop c-bet is pretty close, because I think king x hands are going to call pretty often, and even good queen x hands. So I basically need to get queen x and king x hands to fold, and even ace x hands for that to be a good c-bet. And at these stakes against a more likely a bit funnier opponents, that might happen, but against a regular, I wouldn't expect anything like that to happen. As some of you might know, this is a freestyle Tuesday. Doesn't work that well in English, but if you have any rhymes or poems, you can post them or send them to the chat box. And also if you have jokes or anything like that, I would be more than happy to get them. How about a small bet on the left table? I don't think he's going to fold too often. And if I did try to get him to fold something, I would actually use a bigger sizing, because he's more likely not going to have a full house, and I could have some full houses. But yeah, I think checking is I don't know how much a small bet or even a bigger bet wins in that spot. This is a spot where he's going to have a lot of one pair hands or draws on the flop and turn, and against that range, betting on the river doesn't accomplish too much. And on the river, when I check, he might bet his missed draws and is going to value bet his river trips, but with very good odds and a possibility of him having a missed draw, I'm just going to check call. So again, on the river, we might just look like, oh, we have a very good hand, we have an overpair, this is an easy bet. But actually in spots like that, the value comes from letting him to make the bet, because most of his range is going to be hands that can't call a bet but might bluff, in my opinion. So I haven't seen Biakher or Neo on the Finnish forum, so I'm guessing that you are from somewhere else. We turned trips, and with such small, only less than 2 SPR, I'm just going to bet small, or like half pot, and try to get the money in with 3 bets. Huge, fairly big check raise. So I'm just going to fold my gut shot. No rhymes, no poems, sadly. No jokes. My villain is sitting out. Pepino from Colombia. I will be just... Yeah. Now he's back. I can't just wait and limp, because by limping he also gives him his blind, and I just kind of don't want to fold against guys that are sitting out, because most of my villains are just steal my blinds whenever I have a disconnection. And if I for some reason find out that someone gives me time to get back when I have a disconnection, then I just make a note, and then possibly I don't steal them their blinds, but yeah. This is pretty big 3-bet, and he has been pretty tight with his 3-bets. So I think I'm just going to fold. Okay, be a case from Oulu, which I actually consider to be a part of Finland. Against the min donk bet, I'm just going to call with a king high. He has been doing some donk betting and hasn't been folding the c bets all the time, so now I just fold to turn. "20 minutes to go, so I think we will have a few more tournaments to go. Next week it's going to be Finnish poker night or poker coaching session. Yeah, again a spot where neither of us is really supposed to have anything, but if he has ace high, he could easily just play it like this, so I don't want to bet a pot and get a call. I could have, but yeah. So yeah, next week is in Finnish, but the week after that is planned to be in English again, and it's planned to be 6 max. And if you have any suggestions, or you wish to see some games you haven't seen so far, or maybe even the games you have seen but you want to see more of them, you can just leave a comment on our forum to the insiders section, and then the feedback and suggestions to Youlostbro's No Limit Hold'em nights. This guy is disconnected, and as I said, there has been some discussions about the ethics of or how to react to guys having disconnections and guys being sitting out, but I see it the way that I'm paying rake to PokerStars, and I get a certain amount of money on average by playing one table, and if I just keep waiting for an opponent who might never show up, I just keep decreasing the edge I have. So by registering, that's a hard word, by playing Heads Up Sit and Go, you kind of take a risk of your internet being disconnected. And you agree to that when you register. This is actually a turn that could be dunk betted on, or situation where I have a gut shot and don't I usually would dunk bet in this situation on the turn, but ace is actually a card that he is pretty likely to check back the flop with, so that's pretty much the only card that I'm not going to. And he actually had an ace, but opted not to bet the turn for some reason with it, which is pretty surprising. On the river, I'm the one with more straights or strong hands in that spot, so I opted to bet better pots. And yeah, if I knew that he's likely not to bet an ace on the turn, then I would not have. This is a spot where his flatting range is actually going to contain somewhat lot of king and jack X hands, but with a small c-bet I think I get enough folds to show a profit. And I actually played the Sunday heads up, which is, or even at least was, a $215 MTT, heads up MTT, and my opponent was sitting out, so I tried to limp, and noticed that even by limping I win the pot pre-flop on PokerStars. So I just ended up limping for the whole match, and he never showed up. I waited for, that was a big enough game for me to wait a while, and this is a call, I think. Okay, shoving 14 big blinds with ace queen is definitely something I wouldn't do myself. That's a very good hand, and is pretty likely to win more money by just min raise calling, because I'm going to 3-bet shove hands that are dominated by ace queen by a mile. But I got lucky twice in a row. 15 minutes to go, so I'm just going to open new games, even though I'm running out of voice, even though I have been drinking some. Here this guy has been limp folding every time so far, and when he limp calls, I think he's not gonna have these small cards in his range too much, so with a small c-bet I think I win the pot pretty often. Of course, when he doesn't have a raising range, it's possible for him to have the like pocket aces in his limping range, but yeah. And the sample size is pretty small. Yeah, it's actually a lot more likely that he just hasn't been dealt the best hands yet. Again, a spot if he opts to. This is actually a first time that he min raised or open raised. Again, a spot where I wouldn't be check raising for value because I have too many blockers to his value hands. And against pot sized bet, I'm just going to call and hope for him to be bluffing here and keep bluffing. And yeah, and he shoves, I'd call. He has gut shot. And this is basically how you win, how you make money at these games. I'm going to join a opponent who is just waiting in a lobby from Brazil, and this is the, I don't know if this is a Ronaldo or if this is him. Looks like Ronaldo, who is part of Team PokerStars now, I think. The football legend from Brazil. So yeah, 10 minutes or so to go, and if you have any questions, this would be a pretty good time to ask them, because there won't be too much time to ask and answer them. And this is a bit of a quiet moment. I think these will be the last games of this poker night or this evening. Any questions or related to poker or anything you wish to talk about or ask about, they are welcome, and also the rhymes and poems and the jokes are still welcome. Here on turn Persia Jack, this is actually a card I don't want to be betting on, even with my small flush draws, but I can just bet the river after my turn check. Neo asks that's not a stupid question. That's actually a pretty good question about how to build a 3-bet non-shoving range with deeper stacks. I start with I have kind of a default range in my head, which is pretty polarized to the very best hands and some of the worse hands, and then I adjust it by looking to villains, small blind, raising stats and limping stats, and whether my opponent 3x's or min raises, that's a factor. And then by looking to his fold or call 3-bet stats. So yeah, I usually just start with polarized range, and very often go to heavily just having a value range or just having a bluffing range. And in some occasions I'm just keeping or going on with the polarized range. And it usually makes sense to 3-bet for value if your opponent calls with enough worse hands. And it usually makes sense to 3-bet bluff if your villain folds enough to 3-bets. And with hands that you are not comfortable calling with, that yeah, if you have a hand that you are not certain whether it, like hand like this for example, I don't know for sure if I can flat call this and show a profit post flop, but I think I definitely can 3-bet it for value, or not for value, but and 3-bet and show a profit. This is actually a pretty funny spot. I don't think he's floating too often, so I'm just going to check. So when he calls a flop, he's usually not going to fold to turn bet on this turn. I think if he has trips or something, we have 8 outs, so we have 16, 18. This is pretty close. I think we have good enough equity against that small of a bet, and then I'm just going to check call the river when I hit, because he might have some floats or some bad hands. Again, of course, the turn is pretty close, because if he has a full house, we are throwing that. I don't know what pumped up means in Finnish. So if you want to translate it, that's something I'd like. But yeah, I have been following or watching the Game of Thrones series in the past, and I think they have been great. I haven't read the books, but what I've heard that in the next book, excited, okay. So in the next book, or the parts of the book that the next Game of Thrones season is gonna place in or take a place in, I heard that not too much is going to happen. So the next season might be a bit boring if people or the armies are just moving from one place to another. But hopefully they are able to spice it up some way, and it won't be too boring. And maybe that's the reason they announced 2 seasons at once. So far they have only been announcing one season at a time, but now they announced that there will be at least 2 more seasons. So I'm hoping that the reason is not that the next season is gonna be like not as good as the other ones have been. Yeah, the Full House sucked a bit, but I think he bet so small on the turn that I think we got good enough odds with possible implied odds on the turn that the turn call is fine. I'm just going to 3-bet shove because he called fairly big 3-bet shove with 9-4 suited earlier. We face him in donk bet and then he increases his sizing. I don't really like this turn card, but I don't know. I don't think I can fold. He's gonna have draws, straight draws, often enough. Okay, and he had a middle pair as well. What is the date the first episode of the Game of Thrones airs? Is it like in the end of this month or in the beginning of the April, or when does it air in the States? Yeah, I saw the teaser or the trailer, and it looked pretty sweet. Okay, 8th of April. Neo asks about implied odds. I have a rule of thumb that goes like, if you know the, well, I'm going to try to explain it after these matches. Or maybe I can just try to explain it now. I don't know how to word it though. For example, if we had 8 outs on the turn, so we have something like 18 I'm just going to check and bet this. We have 18% equity. Then well, it's pretty hard to explain. I don't even know what I'm going to say, but if we have 20% equity, it means that after our call, there needs to be 5 times the amount we have to call in the pot. So if we need to call 200 chips and we estimate that we have 20% equity, this is close. I think we can show. If we estimate that we have 20% equity and we need to call 200 chips, there needs to be 1000 chips in the pot after our call. If there are more than 1000 chips after our call, we get direct odds to call. If there are less than 1000, we need to get the remaining chips. Like if after our call there are only 800 chips, we need to get the 200 chips on the river if we hit. I don't know if that was explained even close to clearly, but just by multiplying your number of outs by 2 on turn, or multiplying it by 4 on flop, you get a pretty close estimation about your equity. And then comparing your equity to the pot odds you get, you can pretty easily calculate whether you have direct odds or whether you need some implied odds. And again, we had kind of reverse implied odds in a spot where we needed to hit the flush to lose our whole stack because our opponent already had a full house. I feel like my concentration on the last 2 tables hasn't been perfect. I think we need to call this turn. This is a card that a ace-x hand is going to barrel often on. And actually on the river, he's not repping too much. So I think and with a flush draw missing and so on, he can have like ace-4 or jack-4 or 4x of clubs, but I don't think he's going to value bet too thin, and I'm just going to call and win the ace-queen pretty often, I think. 8-7, okay. So even though we had a 4th pair or something, 3rd pair on a 4 straight card board, that looked like a pretty good spot to call. I'm going to shove this. I think he's going to raise the better hands often enough with such stack sizes. So yeah, I'll try to explain the same thing I explained earlier. So if you have 20% equity and you only get 2-1 to call, so after your call if you need to call 200 chips, if you need to call 200 chips and into a pot that after a call there's 600 chips and you only have 20% equity, there would need to be 1000 chips. So since you have 20% equity, you need to get 4-1 to break even, or to get if you get 4-1, you don't need to have implied odds. But since you only get 2-1, you need the remaining 2 parts of the pot, or like, I don't know, I don't really know how to say it. If you call 200 chips into a pot that is going to be 600, and it would need to be 1000. So the difference between 1000 and the 600, so the difference between the pot size it needed to be compared to the pot size it actually is, you need to get the difference on the river to get the correct implied odds. That's actually very hard to explain, but yeah. I called him in raise. This is actually a spot where I could have... he limped min raise it the first time, and this is actually a spot where I could have dunk shoved myself. Kind of a stop and go. But this was the reason I didn't do it is that this was his first limp race. So he's going to have value hands too often, in my opinion. Yeah, pretty much like that. I don't use the... I don't know if the way I think about the implied odds is the way most people do, but it's something I have learned to do, so I might not be the best person to give advices. Give advices on that. I think betting flop when he doesn't fold to c-bets too much is standard, and down he leads rivers fairly often, so I'm just going to check and call the river bet. Yeah. And this guy limped called 11 bigs with aces. I think it's fine. Good idea. If he's gonna have some limping range, aces can definitely be a part of it. This guy is limp betting a lot, so 10 big blinds I think I can just shove with a gut shot. We are actually in pretty bad shape because he has he has hearts and an 8, so we were drawing pretty thin against a king high, unfortunately. Shoving 5 big blinds. This is actually a stage of the game that I pretty much try to compare the Nash ranges to my villain stats and see if I can play wider than the Nash recommended, or maybe a bit tighter, or so on. Okay, he's limp folding 7 big blinds effective, so I can bluff shove over his limps more. And yeah, I'm not going to fold 9 big blinds effective this hand this strong. He even limp called with aces, so he might do it again, so we actually might get more folds than we need to, way more. Okay. This was it for the night. Neo asks, what stats do I use to know if I can shove looser or tighter than the Nash? I just use the VPIP and PFR ranges. These stats. If my villain plays way tighter than good regular will, then he is a bit more likely to, in my opinion, to call with the smallest stack sizes as well.
So yeah, it's pretty simple when it comes to that, in my opinion. This was it for the bulk night this evening, and thanks for participating. And you can leave a comment, feedback to the feedback thread, and suggestions for the future poker nights as well. And yeah, more gas and even fewer breaks in the next sessions. Yeah, good night.